I stood in front of my children in the living room of the mansion I'd built from nothing, the one with marble floors that echoed when you walked alone at night, and I told them the lie that would change everything. "It's gone," I said, my voice steady even though my heart was racing. All of it. The company, the houses, the accounts. Everything. I watched their faces carefully. The way my oldest son's jaw tightened. How my daughter's eyes darted to her husband. The way my youngest stepped back like I'd just told him I had a contagious disease. The silence that followed wasn't the kind that comes before comfort. It was the kind that comes before goodbye. Within a week, my phone stopped ringing. The group chat went quiet. Sunday dinners were suddenly complicated. But on the 8th night, when I was sitting alone in that big empty house, staring at my phone like it might come back to life, it finally rang. And when I answered, I heard the only voice that mattered. "Mom, I'm coming over. I don't care what happened. You're still my mom." That's when I knew I'd found something worth more than $250 million. I'm Margaret, and before I go on, I'd love to know something. Where are you listening from? I always read the comments. And if you enjoy stories like this, go ahead and subscribe so I can share more with you. Now, let me tell you how I got to that moment. It started 6 months earlier, on a Tuesday morning that felt like any other. I was sitting in my office on the 42nd floor, looking out at the city I'd conquered, when my assistant brought in my coffee. She set it down without a word, the way she'd done for 15 years. I remember thinking how quiet everything had become, how efficient, how empty. That night, I came home to the mansion in Bel Air, the one with 8 bedrooms and a staff of 5. I walked through the front door, and the housekeeper greeted me with a polite smile. "Good evening, Mrs. Chen. Dinner is ready whenever you are." I nodded, climbed the stairs to my bedroom, and sat on the edge of my bed, still in my coat. The house was silent except for the hum of central air conditioning. I couldn't remember the last time I'd heard laughter in these walls. I built my company from nothing, came to America at 23 with $800 in my pocket and a suitcase held together with rope, started cleaning offices at night while taking business classes during the day. My English was broken, my shoes had holes, but I had something nobody could take from me. I had hunger, real hunger. The kind that makes you work when everyone else sleeps. 28 years later, I owned one of the largest logistics companies on the West Coast. $250 million in assets, properties in 5 states, a name that opened doors and closed deals. I'd given my 3 children everything I never had. The best schools, the best clothes, cars on their 16th birthdays, college funds that could have bought houses. I thought I was giving them the world. Maybe I was. Maybe that was the problem. My oldest, Richard, ran the East Coast division of my company. He was good at it too. Sharp, focused, always dressed like he was about to close a billion-dollar deal. But when I called him, our conversations rarely lasted more than 5 minutes. "Mom, I'm in a meeting. Can I call you back?" He never did. When he visited, which wasn't often, he'd walk through my house like he was touring a museum, checking his watch every 10 minutes. My daughter, Susan, married a plastic surgeon and moved to Manhattan. She had 2 children I barely knew. They called me Grandmother Margaret, in voices so polite they sounded rehearsed. When Susan called, it was usually to tell me about some charity gala or vacation in the Hamptons. She'd ask how I was doing, but I could hear her attention drifting before I finished answering. "That's wonderful, Mom. Listen, I have to run. Bradley's waiting." Then there was my youngest, Michael, 28 years old and still finding himself. He'd been through art school, culinary school, and something he called entrepreneurship coaching, all funded by me. He lived in a condo in Santa Monica that I'd bought him, drove a Tesla I'd leased, and called me every few months, usually around the time rent was due. "Hey, Mom, I've got this amazing opportunity." I kept telling myself they were busy. That's what successful children do. They build their own lives. I should have been proud. I was proud. But late at night, when I sat alone in that big house, I couldn't help wondering, if I lost everything tomorrow, would they still call? Would they still show up? Or was I just the woman who signed the checks? The thought started small, like a whisper I could ignore, but it grew louder every time Richard cut a phone call short. Every time Susan mentioned my estate planning, a little too casually. Every time Michael's voice got that particular tone, the one that meant he needed money but was trying to sound like he didn't. 3 months ago, I had lunch with my attorney, David Morrison. We'd known each other for 20 years. He was drafting updates to my will, and as we talked, he mentioned something that stuck with me. You know, Margaret, I've seen a lot of wealthy families torn apart after someone passes. Children fighting over assets, relationships destroyed. It's ugly. He paused, stirring his coffee. Sometimes I think the smart ones find out who really cares before it's too late. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what David had said, about my children, about the way they looked at me now versus the way they looked at me when they were small. I remembered Richard at 7, crying because he'd failed a spelling test, and I held him until he stopped shaking. I remembered Susan at 12, telling me I was her hero because I'd spoken up for her at school. I remembered Michael at 5, refusing to let go of my hand on his first day of kindergarten. Where did those children go? When did they become strangers who only knew how to take? I got out of bed and went to my office downstairs. I pulled out photo albums I hadn't opened in years. There we were, me and Richard at his college graduation, his arm around my shoulders, genuine pride in his eyes. Me and Susan at her wedding, dancing together, both of us laughing so hard we could barely stand. Me and Michael on his 18th birthday, making silly faces at the camera. They loved me once. I knew they did. But did they love me now? Or did they love what I represented? The safety net, the inheritance, the backup plan. I made a decision that night. A crazy decision, maybe. But I had to know. The next morning, I called my accountant, my attorney, and my most trusted financial advisor. I told them what I wanted to do, and they all thought I'd lost my mind. Margaret, this is extreme, David said over the phone. You're talking about staging a complete financial collapse. Do you understand how complicated this will be? I understood. I also understood that I needed to know the truth while I still had time to do something about it. It took 6 weeks to set everything up. We created shell companies, transferred assets, drafted fake bankruptcy documents that looked real enough to fool anyone who wasn't a forensic accountant. My team thought I was having some kind of breakdown. Maybe I was. But I'd built an empire by trusting my instincts, and my instincts were screaming that something was wrong with my family. I decided to tell them in person. All 3 of them. I invited them to Sunday dinner, something I hadn't done in months. I told them it was important, that I needed to see them all together. Richard tried to reschedule twice. Susan asked if she could bring Bradley and the kids. Michael asked if I was dying. Just come, I said. Please. That Sunday, I spent all morning preparing. Not food. I had the chef for that, but myself. I rehearsed what I'd say, how I'd say it. I put on a simple dress, nothing expensive. I took off most of my jewelry except for my wedding ring, the one my husband gave me 40 years ago, before the money, before everything changed. He died 10 years ago, and sometimes I wondered what he'd think of the people our children had become. They arrived within minutes of each other. Richard in his BMW, Susan in a Mercedes SUV with the kids strapped in the back, Michael in his Tesla. They walked in like they were attending a business meeting, not visiting their mother. Polite kisses on the cheek, comments about traffic. Susan's children were handed tablets the moment they sat down, and I didn't see them look up once. We ate dinner with conversation so surface level it hurt. The weather, Richard's latest deal, Susan's renovation plans, Michael's new business idea that he was clearly building up to pitch. Nobody asked about me. Not really. Not in the way that meant they actually wanted to know. After dessert, I asked the housekeeper to take the children to the media room. Susan hesitated but nodded. Then I looked at my 3 grown children, sitting around the dining table where we'd shared 1,000 meals, and I felt my heart beating so hard I thought they could hear it. I need to tell you something, I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. Something important. Richard checked his watch. Susan glanced at her phone. Michael leaned back in his chair, waiting. I took a breath and spoke the words that would change everything. The company is gone. I made some bad investments, trusted the wrong people. We've filed for bankruptcy. The house, the cars, the accounts. It's all being liquidated to cover debts. I paused, watching their faces. I'm losing everything. The silence that followed wasn't concern. It was calculation. I could see it in their eyes. The mental math, the quick assessment of what this meant for them. Not for me. For them. Richard spoke first. What do you mean everything? The trust funds? The properties? His voice was sharp, accusatory, like I'd committed a crime against him personally. Susan's face had gone pale. Mom, we're going to be okay, right? The kids' college funds are separate, aren't they? Michael just stared at me. You're serious? This isn't some kind of test or something? And there it was. The question I'd been dreading and hoping for at the same time. This isn't a test, I lied, looking my youngest son in the eyes. This is real. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. What happened next broke something in me that I don't think will ever fully heal. Richard stood up first. He didn't push his chair back gently. He shoved it, and it scraped against the hardwood floor with a sound that made me flinch. I need to make some calls, he said, already pulling out his phone. He didn't look at me. Didn't ask if I was okay, if I needed anything, if I was scared. He just walked out of the dining room, his voice already sharp and businesslike as he started dialing. I heard him in the foyer. Yeah, it's me. We have a situation. Susan sat frozen, her perfectly manicured hands gripping the edge of the table. Her lips were moving slightly, like she was running calculations in her head. Finally, she looked at me, and her eyes weren't soft. They were hard, almost angry. How could you let this happen, Mom? How could you be so careless? The word stung. Careless. Like I'd spilled wine on a carpet, not lost everything I'd spent 3 decades building. I have children to think about. Private school tuition is due next month. Do you understand what this means for us? Michael hadn't moved. He was still sitting there, staring at his plate, his face unreadable. For a moment, I thought maybe he was different. Maybe he was processing, trying to figure out how to help. Then he spoke, his voice quiet and cold. So that business loan you promised me, that's not happening, is it? Not, are you okay, Mom? Not, how can I help? Just the loan. That's what he was thinking about while I sat there, supposedly losing everything. The next hour was a blur of angry voices and accusations. Richard came back in, his face red, demanding to see documents. I want to talk to your accountant, your lawyer. This doesn't make sense. You're too smart for this. But he didn't mean it as a compliment. He meant I was lying, or hiding something, or that this was somehow my fault in a way that affected him unfairly. Susan called Bradley, speaking in hushed, urgent tones in the corner. I caught fragments. Her assets, our future, might need to cut her off. By 9 o'clock, they were all gone. No hugs goodbye. No, we'll figure this out together. Richard said he'd be in touch once he spoke to his own financial advisors. Susan said she needed to process this and would call me later. Michael just left, his Tesla's engine barely making a sound as he drove away into the night. I stood in the doorway, watching their taillights disappear, and felt more alone than I'd ever felt in my life. That night, I sat in the dark living room, my phone in my lap, waiting for it to ring. Surely one of them would call back. Surely once the shock wore off, one of them would remember I was their mother, and that I was going through something devastating. The phone stayed silent. I finally went to bed at 2 in the morning, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake. Maybe I should call them, tell them the truth. But no, I needed to see this through. The next morning, I texted all 3 of them. I know this is a shock, but I need you to know I'm going to be okay. I love you all so much. Richard's response came an hour later. We need to talk about the legal implications. I've scheduled a meeting with my attorney. Susan sent, Mom, I'm really overwhelmed right now. Can we talk next week? Michael didn't respond at all. I spent that week in a strange kind of limbo. I went through my normal routine. The housekeeper still came. The chef still prepared meals. The gardeners still maintained the grounds. Everything looked the same. But I was different. I was seeing everything through new eyes. How much of my life was just performance? How much of my relationships were just transactions? On Wednesday, I called Richard. It went to voicemail. I called again Thursday. Voicemail. Friday. His assistant answered his office line. Mrs. Chen, Richard is in meetings all day. I'll let him know you called. She sounded uncomfortable, like she'd been instructed to say that. My own son was screening my calls. Susan finally called me back on Saturday morning. I was in the garden, pretending to read, when my phone rang. Mom, hi, she said, her voice bright but strained. How are you holding up? Before I could answer, she continued. Listen, I've been thinking, maybe this is a good opportunity for you to downsize. You don't need that big house anyway, right? It's just you there. Bradley knows a real estate agent who specializes in, distressed sales. Distressed sales. That's what I'd become to my daughter. A problem to be solved, a property to be liquidated. Susan, I said carefully, I'm not thinking about the house right now. I'm just trying to… She cut me off. Mom, you have to be practical. If you're really losing everything, you need to act fast. Protect whatever you can. I'm just trying to help. But she wasn't trying to help me. She was trying to help herself feel better about abandoning me. Michael finally texted on Sunday. Hey, I'm going through some stuff. Need some space. Hope you understand. Space. My son needed space from me because I'd lost my money. I typed and deleted 5 different responses before finally sending, I understand. I love you. He didn't respond. The second week was worse. The calls stopped completely. The group chat we'd always used for family coordination went quiet. I sent a photo of flowers from the garden, something I used to do all the time, and nobody reacted. Not even an emoji. It was like I'd been erased. I started going through old boxes in the attic. Photos, letters, report cards, Mother's Day cards made from construction paper and glue. To the best mom in the world, Richard had written in crayon when he was 8. I love you more than infinity, Susan had scrawled at 10. Michael's card from kindergarten had a drawing of us holding hands, both figures smiling under a bright yellow sun. I sat on the dusty attic floor, holding these relics, and cried. On Tuesday of the 3rd week, Richard sent an email. Not a call, not a text, an email. Mom, I've been consulting with my legal team about the bankruptcy proceedings. I think it's best if we maintain some professional distance during this process to avoid any conflicts of interest. I'm sure you understand. Let me know if you need references for attorneys. Professional distance. From his mother. I read it 3 times, trying to find warmth somewhere in those corporate sentences. There wasn't any. Susan called that Thursday, but it wasn't a comfort call. Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Did you put anything in our names? The condo in Aspen, the investment accounts? Are those protected? I felt something crack inside my chest. You want to know if your inheritance is safe, I said quietly. There was a pause. That's not what I meant. We have to think about the future. You understand, don't you? What would you have done in my place? I still ask myself that sometimes. I started taking long walks through the neighborhood, past houses where families lived, where I could hear laughter through open windows and see kids playing in yards. I'd wave to neighbors I'd barely spoken to in years, and they'd wave back, friendly but distant. One woman, Mrs. Patterson, stopped me one day. Margaret, is everything all right? I haven't seen your kids visiting lately. I didn't know what to say. They're busy, I finally managed. She nodded, but her eyes were kind. Well, if you ever need anything, I'm just 3 doors down. That small kindness from a near stranger hit me harder than all my children's coldness combined. I went home and cried for an hour straight. Michael showed up on Saturday of the 3rd week. I saw his Tesla pull into the driveway, and my heart jumped. Finally, he came. But when he walked in, his face was hard, determined. Mom, we need to talk. He didn't sit down, just stood there in the foyer, hands in his pockets. I've been offered an opportunity in New York, a real one this time, but I need some startup capital. He paused. I know things are bad, but if you could just… I felt like I'd been slapped. Michael, I whispered, you came here to ask me for money? After 3 weeks of silence, you came to ask for money? He had the decency to look ashamed, but only for a second. I'm trying to build something, Mom. You always said I should be independent. Well, this is me trying. But I need help one last time. One last time. We both knew that was a lie. I don't have it to give, I said, the words hollow in my mouth. I told you. Everything is gone. He nodded slowly, and I saw something die in his eyes. Whatever small affection he'd been holding on to, it died right there. Okay, he said. I guess that's that. He turned to leave, and I called out, Michael, wait. Don't you want to just talk? Stay for coffee? Tell me about this opportunity? He looked back at me, one hand on the door. What's the point, Mom? Then he left. I sank down on the stairs and put my head in my hands. This was my fault. I'd raised them this way. I'd taught them that love came with dollar signs, that relationships were investments, that everything had a price. I'd wanted to give them everything, and in doing so, I'd given them nothing real at all. That night, I pulled out my husband's old letters, the ones he'd written to me when we first came to America, when we were poor but together, when we slept on a mattress on the floor and dreamed of something better. Margaret, he'd written in his careful English. Today I saw you share your lunch with that old woman at the bus stop. You had so little, but you gave half of it away. That's when I knew I'd married someone special. Money can't buy that kind of heart. I cried reading those words. My husband had seen something in me worth loving when I had nothing, and now I had everything, and my own children couldn't see me at all. The fourth week brought a new kind of pain. Susan sent a brief text. Mom, the kids are asking about Thanksgiving. I think it's better if we do something small this year. Just our immediate family. I hope you understand. Immediate family. I wasn't immediate family anymore. I was the embarrassing relative you avoid at holidays, the one whose failure might be contagious. Richard's assistant sent a calendar invite to discuss estate matters. Not lunch, not coffee, a meeting, with his assistant scheduling it. When I called to ask if we could just talk, person to person, she said, Mr. Chen prefers to keep things professional right now. I'm sure you understand. I didn't understand. I didn't understand any of it. I started having dreams where my children were small again. In the dreams, I'd be trying to reach them, but they'd keep walking away, getting smaller and smaller until they disappeared. I'd wake up gasping, my pillow wet with tears, and reach for my phone hoping for a message. There never was one. On the 31st day, I was counting now. My phone rang at 11 at night. An unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Hello? My voice was rough from crying. There was a pause, then, Mom? It was Michael, but his voice was different, softer, broken. Mom, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding. Michael, what's wrong? Where are you? He was crying. I could hear it in his breathing, in the way his words caught in his throat. I'm outside. I've been sitting in your driveway for 20 minutes trying to get the courage to knock. Can I come in? I don't care about the money. I don't care about any of it. I just miss my mom. I was down the stairs before he finished talking. I threw open the front door, and there he was. My baby boy, 28 years old, standing on my porch with tears streaming down his face. I'm so sorry, he said again. I've been such an idiot, such a selfish idiot. You raised me better than this. I pulled him into my arms, and he collapsed against me like he used to when he was small, when the world was too big, and only Mom could make it safe again. We went inside and sat at the kitchen table, not the formal dining room where I'd told them the lie. The kitchen, where we used to sit when he'd come home from school, where I'd help him with homework and listen to him talk about his day. I couldn't sleep, he said, wiping his eyes. I kept thinking about you here alone, about how you must be feeling, and I realized I haven't asked you that once, not once. How are you feeling, Mom? The question broke me. I started crying, really crying, for the first time since this all started. I'm scared, I admitted. Not about the money. I'm scared because I thought I'd raised you all to be better than this. I'm scared because I'm watching my children turn into strangers, and I don't know how to reach you anymore. Michael reached across the table and took my hand. You didn't fail us, Mom. We failed you. We talked until 3 a.m. Really talked. He told me how guilty he'd been feeling, how ashamed. How Richard and Susan had been texting him, saying things like, "She made her bed," and "We can't let her drag us down." How he'd been going along with it because it was easier than standing up to them. But then tonight, he said, "I was lying in bed, and I remembered something. You remember when I was 12 and I crashed my bike?" I nodded. He'd broken his arm and been too scared to call me because he'd been riding in a place I'd told him not to go. "You dropped everything and came to get me. You didn't yell. You just held me and said, 'It's okay. We all make mistakes. I'm just glad you're safe.' And I realized, you've always been there. Every single time. And the one time you needed us. Where was I?" His voice cracked. "I'm here now, Mom. I'm sorry it took me so long. But I'm here now." Something in my chest loosened. One of them came back. One of them remembered what love actually meant. It wasn't all three. It wasn't perfect. But it was something. It was real. What happened next changed everything. Not just for us, but for the entire family. Michael stayed that night. He slept in his old bedroom, the one I'd kept exactly the way it was when he left for college. In the morning, I found him in the kitchen making coffee. Not asking the staff to do it, but making it himself. The way we used to on Sunday mornings when he was young. "Mom," he said as I walked in, "I've been thinking. I want to help you through this. Whatever you need. I can get a real job, something stable. I held up my hand, and something in my face made him stop. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I'd prepared for this moment, rehearsed it 100 times in my mind. But now that it was here, the words stuck in my throat. I sat down at the kitchen table, and he sat across from me, concern written all over his face. "Michael," I started, my voice shaking, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen to the whole thing before you react." He nodded slowly, and I saw fear flash in his eyes. "What is it? Are you sick?" "I'm not sick," I said, "but I haven't been honest with you." I took a deep breath, and the words came out in a rush. None of it was real. The bankruptcy, the loss, all of it. I made it up. I staged the whole thing. The silence that followed was deafening. Michael's face went through a dozen emotions in as many seconds. Confusion, disbelief, anger, hurt. What? His voice was barely a whisper. "The company is fine," I continued, forcing myself to keep talking. "The house, the money, everything. It's all still here. I created fake documents, moved assets around to make it look real. I did it because I needed to know. My hands were trembling so badly I had to grip the edge of the table. I needed to know if you loved me, or if you just loved what I could give you." Michael stood up so fast his chair fell backward with a crash. "You tested us?" His voice was rising, his face flushing red. "You put us through hell for a month because you wanted to test us?" I'd never seen him this angry, not in his entire life. "Do you have any idea how I felt? The nightmares I had? I thought you were going to end up on the street, Mom. I thought—" His voice broke, and he turned away from me, his hands in his hair. "I know," I said, tears streaming down my face. "I know it was cruel. But Michael, you have to understand. I was drowning. I was surrounded by people, my own children, and I was completely alone. Every conversation was about money. Every visit felt like a transaction. I needed to know if there was anything left that was real." I stood up, wanting to go to him, but he stepped back. "You came back," I said. "You're the only one who came back." He stared at me for a long moment, his chest heaving. "Richard and Susan," he said finally. "Do they know?" I shook my head. "You're the first person I've told." He laughed, but it was a bitter sound. "So what now? You're going to tell them? Watch them grovel? Make them feel like garbage for failing your test?" His words cut deep because part of me had thought exactly that. Part of me had wanted them to fail. "I don't know," I admitted. "I don't know what to do now. I just know I couldn't lie to you anymore. Not after last night. Not after you came back." Michael was quiet for a long time, staring out the kitchen window. When he finally spoke, his voice was tired. "I'm angry, Mom. I'm really angry. What you did was manipulative and wrong." He turned to look at me. "But I also understand why you did it. And that makes me even angrier. Because you were right to question us. We sat in that uncomfortable truth for hours. Michael didn't leave, but he didn't forgive me either. We talked in circles, argued, cried. He told me how Richard had sent a group text without me in it, saying things like, "We need to protect ourselves," and "She made her choices." How Susan had suggested they might need to look into legal options to distance themselves from Mom's liabilities. How alone he'd felt, caught between loyalty to his siblings and the nagging voice in his head that said this wasn't right. "I almost didn't come back," he confessed as the afternoon sun slanted through the windows. "I was in my car 3 different times ready to drive over here, and I'd talk myself out of it. Richard kept saying I was being irrational, that I needed to think about my future. And Susan," he paused, "Susan said you'd understand if we needed to step back, that you were strong enough to handle it alone." Those words hurt more than anything Richard had done. Susan, my only daughter, had given them permission to abandon me. She'd framed it as faith in my strength, but it was really just permission for their weakness. "But you came anyway," I said softly. Michael nodded. "I couldn't not come. I kept thinking about Dad." My breath caught. "What about him?" "I remember this thing he said to me before he died," Michael said, his eyes distant. "I was 20 and I'd just blown through my semester's allowance in like 6 weeks. You were so disappointed in me, and I complained to Dad about how you didn't understand. And he said, 'Your mother came to this country with nothing. She built everything you take for granted. When she's disappointed, it's not because you spent money. It's because she's scared you don't know the difference between what costs money and what money can't buy.'" I'd never known he'd said that. Never knew Michael had carried those words. "I didn't understand it then," Michael continued, "but I understood it at 11 o'clock last night, sitting in your driveway. Money can't buy what I felt right then. That sick, horrible feeling that I'd failed the one person who never failed me." He looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. "So yeah, I'm angry you tested us, but I'm angrier at myself for almost failing." The next morning, Michael and I sat down and had the hardest conversation of my life. "What do you want to do about Richard and Susan?" he asked. I'd been awake all night thinking about that exact question. "I want to tell them the truth," I said. "But I want to do it the right way, not to punish them, to show them what they've become." Michael was quiet for a moment. "They're not going to take this well." I called Richard first. He answered on the 4th ring, his voice clipped. "Mom, I'm busy. Can this wait?" I took a deep breath. "No, it can't. I need you to come to the house. Today. It's important." There was a long pause. "Is this about the bankruptcy? Because my attorney said—" I cut him off. "Richard, I'm your mother. I'm asking you to come to my house. Please." Something in my voice must have gotten through, because he sighed. "Fine. I can be there at 6. Susan was harder. When I called, she let it go to voicemail 3 times before finally picking up. "Mom, hi. Listen, this isn't a great time." I could hear children shouting in the background, normal family chaos. "Susan, I need to see you and Richard, together, tonight at 6. She hesitated. "Mom, I don't know if that's a good idea. Things are still really tense, and I don't think we're ready to—" Her words were so careful, so practiced. "I'm not asking you to be ready," I said. "I'm asking you to be here." At exactly 6 o'clock, Richard's BMW pulled into the driveway. 5 minutes later, Susan arrived in her Mercedes. They got out of their cars and looked at each other with expressions I couldn't quite read, something between solidarity and discomfort. They walked in together, and I noticed they didn't hug me, just polite nods. Michael was sitting in the living room, and they both looked surprised to see him. "You're here," Richard said, and there was an edge to his voice. I'd set up the living room carefully. Not the formal dining room where I'd told them the lie, but the living room where we'd spent Christmas mornings, where we'd watched movies as a family, where life had happened before it got complicated. "Sit down," I said. "All 3 of you." Something in my tone made them obey. They sat on the couch, Richard and Susan on one side, Michael on the other. The divide was visible, physical. "I brought you here because I need to show you something," I said. My hands were shaking, but my voice was steady. I walked to my desk and pulled out a folder. Inside were bank statements, asset reports, corporate documents, all showing that everything was fine, intact, exactly as it had always been. I placed them on the coffee table in front of Richard and Susan. Take a look. Richard picked up the first document, his brow furrowed. I watched his eyes scan the page, saw the moment understanding hit. His face went white, then red. What is this? Susan leaned over, reading over his shoulder. Her hand flew to her mouth. Oh my God! Richard stood up, the papers falling from his hands. This is dated last week. These accounts, they're all active. Everything's still here. He turned to me, and I'd never seen him look at me like that before. What the hell, Mom? There was no bankruptcy, I said quietly. No loss, no financial collapse. I made it up. Susan made a sound like she'd been punched. You made it up? Her voice was shrill, disbelieving. You put us through this nightmare because… What? You were bored? You wanted to mess with us? Richard's hands were clenched into fists at his sides. This is insane. You're insane. Do you understand what you've done? I understand what you've done, I said. And my voice was stronger now. For 31 days, I pretended to lose everything. And for 31 days, I watched you all disappear. No calls, no visits, no, how are you, Mom? Or do you need anything? Just silence, and calculations. And Richard, I looked at my oldest son. You had your assistant screen my calls. Richard's face flushed darker. You were in crisis. I was trying to protect my family from… I cut him off. From me? I'm your mother, Richard. I'm your family. Or I thought I was. I turned to Susan. And you. You told me to sell my house, suggested a real estate agent who specialized in distressed sales. Your mother was distressed, Susan, not a property. Susan's eyes were filling with tears, but I couldn't tell if they were from guilt or anger. That's not fair, she said. We were in shock. We didn't know how to handle it. I pulled out my phone and opened the screenshots I'd saved. This is the group chat you created without me. The one where Richard said, we need to protect ourselves, and you said, she made her choices. Where you all agreed it was better to maintain distance. The room went silent. Michael hadn't said a word, just sat there watching his siblings' faces crumble. I had to pretend to lose everything, I said, my voice breaking now, to find out who really loved me. And the answer broke my heart. Only one of you came back. Only one of you remembered that before I was the woman with money, I was your mother. Richard's anger seemed to deflate. He sank back onto the couch, his head in his hands. Mom, He didn't finish. What could he say? Susan was crying openly now, mascara running down her cheeks. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened to me. To us. She looked at Michael. How did you know? How did you know to come back? Michael finally spoke, his voice rough. I didn't know. I couldn't not come. She's our mom. The simplicity of that statement hung in the air. She's our mom. That should have been enough. For 31 days, it hadn't been. The next hour was brutal. There was yelling, tears, accusations thrown back and forth. Richard tried to justify his actions, saying he'd been practical and protecting his family. Susan kept apologizing, but also defending herself, saying she'd been overwhelmed and didn't know what to do. Michael stayed quiet mostly, but when Richard tried to turn it around on me, saying what I'd done was emotional manipulation, Michael stood up. You're right, Michael said. What Mom did was manipulation. It was wrong. I'm angry about it too. Richard looked vindicated for a moment, but Michael wasn't finished. But you know what? She was testing us, and we failed. We completely, utterly failed. And instead of owning that, you're standing here trying to make this about her? He shook his head. Dad would be ashamed of us. That broke something in Richard. He crumpled, really crumpled. And for the first time in years, I saw my son instead of the businessman he'd become. I know, he said, his voice thick. I know, okay? I know what I did. I know what we did. And He looked at me, and his eyes were devastated. I don't know how to fix this, Mom. I don't know if I can. The house went quiet except for the sound of Susan crying. I sat down, suddenly exhausted. I don't know either, I admitted. I don't know if we can go back, but I know we can't go forward like this. Something has to change. I looked at each of them. I won't apologize for the test. I needed to know the truth, but I will apologize for the pain it caused. That was real, even if the circumstances weren't. We talked until midnight. Really talked, the way we hadn't in years. Richard admitted he'd become so focused on success that he'd forgotten what it was for. Susan confessed she'd been living in fear of losing her lifestyle, and somewhere along the way, had started seeing me as a safety net instead of a person. I forgot you had feelings, she said, and the honesty of it was devastating. I forgot you could hurt. Michael told them about his conversation with me the night before, about Dad's words. We grew up with everything, he said, and somehow that made us forget the value of anything, especially Mom. Richard nodded slowly. I used to think I'd earned everything I have, but I didn't. Mom earned it. I just inherited the privilege and forgot to inherit the gratitude. In the weeks that followed, things changed slowly. Richard started calling every few days, and the conversations weren't about business. They were about life, about feelings, about him trying to learn how to be a son again instead of just an heir. Susan came over with the kids, and for the first time in years, they stayed for hours. She helped me plant flowers in the garden while the children played, and we talked about things that mattered. Michael moved back home for a month. Just until we figure things out, he said. But I think he needed it as much as I did. The chance to rebuild something that had been broken. We cooked together, watched old movies, talked late into the night. He met Mrs. Patterson from down the street and started helping her with her yard work. She reminds me of what you were like, he said one day, before we stopped seeing it. The family dinners started again, but they were different now. Smaller, more honest. Sometimes they were uncomfortable. Sometimes old patterns would surface, and someone would say something that reminded us all of what we'd been. But then someone else would catch it, call it out gently, and we'd course correct. It wasn't perfect. It was real. Richard brought his wife one Sunday, and after dinner, she pulled me aside. He told me everything, she said. What you did, what happened, and I have to tell you, I've never seen him so shaken, but I also think he needed it. We both did. She squeezed my hand. Thank you for loving him enough to risk losing him. Not every parent would have that courage. 6 months later, on Mother's Day, I woke up to voices in my kitchen. All 3 of my children were there, cooking breakfast, making a mess, laughing, arguing about whether the bacon was crispy enough. When they saw me, they didn't freeze up or get formal. Michael pulled out a chair. Susan poured me coffee. Richard set down a plate of slightly burnt pancakes. We made these ourselves, he said. No chef, just us. On the table was a card. Inside, each of them had written something. Richard's message was simple. I'm sorry it took losing you to find you again. I love you, Mom. Not your money. You. Susan had written, thank you for showing me who I'd become, even though it hurt. I'm learning to be the daughter you deserve. Michael's note made me cry. You never lost everything, Mom. You just found out what really mattered. So did we. That morning, sitting around my kitchen table with my 3 children, eating burnt pancakes and laughing about it, I realized something. The test had been cruel, maybe, but it had also been necessary. Sometimes love needs to be challenged to prove it's real. Sometimes we need to lose everything to remember what we can't afford to lose. Have you ever been through something like this? Tell me in the comments. I always read everyone. And if this story touched your heart, subscribe, so I can share more with you. Sometimes the hardest truths lead us to the most important love. And sometimes, just sometimes, we get a second chance to get it right.